Welcome to Automation Hour. Thanks for joining us. If you are joining us for the first time, all lines are muted. Please post your questions in the question area in this webinar, or you can post them out on our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. And we'll have the link to the deck as well as the recording posted sometime after the session. And that will be posted on our website, Salesforce Automation Hour, automationhour.com, and our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. And if you haven't signed up for our future sessions, we have 3 scheduled. We're in the process of scheduling additional ones for the rest of the year. So if you have a business use case and a cool process automation solution that you would like to share with the community, definitely reach out to me and we will get you booked in a future session. And I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io. Without them, we cannot bring this free webinar series to you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And here are your hosts, myself, David, and Rakesh. We miss seeing you all in person, and hopefully we'll see you in person when it's safe to do so. Jumped ahead, hold on. We're having slide problems. All right. So I want to hand it over to Deanne. She is a first-time presenter on Automation Hour. I've seen her at Cactus Force. So I'm excited to have her share her presentation from Cactus Force with our audience today. So with that, let me switch over to Deanne. And you should have control.
Hello, my name is Deanne Walters. I am the manager for Salesforce Communities at New Leaders. I'm a 3-time certified Salesforce admin. I've presented at Cactus Force as well as other places. I write on Medium about Salesforce, especially about Flow, and I'm also on Twitter. So let's jump into the agenda. So just to start off, since I come from the nonprofit world, I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the vocabulary I'll be using today. So we have programs all over the US. New Leaders serves school leaders from the principal, assistant principal level, and even teacher leader level. And so we train them to become better leaders, so that way we can have have kids be more successful in schools. So each of these programs in a specific location is called the cohort, and then within the cohort, we will have participants. The main object we're going to be working with today is the application object, which is how our participants get registered for our programs or apply for our programs. The first step of that process I'll be going through today with my flow is the registration form, which used to be called the background information form. So sometimes I'll use those two terms interchangeably. What I'm going to be going through is what were some of the requirements that we started with when developing the flow, what the staff view looks like for how do we set up cohorts, how do we control the details of what kind of options different cohorts have within the flow, the participant view of what does going through the flow from the community or Salesforce Experience side look like, and then the real juicy, the flow backend. Let's see all of the little tricks and tips. I made it to be the best it could possibly be. So as you can see here, I had a lot of different requirements that I was working with. We were moving, our business process is moving from kind of just a general total open application system to now only wanting specific people in the district to apply. So that's where we moved to kind of an invite only system. We didn't want duplicate applications to be created if the user stops and starts the application, since some of them can be pretty long. We wanted the user's progress saved after every screen. If we already had information in Salesforce, we wanted to pre-populate that. A lot of our participants come back year over year, so we didn't want to have them have to give us their cell phone number every time. We also wanted to give participants the ability to register for a new cohort at any point in time, as well as giving people the correct next step depending on their cohort. Some cohorts are selection-based, so they'll need to go on and do additional activities, whereas others will get this registration is just for their information, and then we are just directing them into our LMS where they'll get immediate access to the materials. We also needed for some versions of the registration form to have a resume uploaded. So how do we make that as clear as possible? We also wanted to, I wanted to validate the fields and show clear error messages. So making sure people didn't run into any system problems like going over the number of characters in a text field. Additionally, we wanted custom error messages if participants ran into a Salesforce error. And then we wanted, we have multiple versions of kind of different lengths of our application, depending on whether it's just somebody who we have a set roster and that's who's coming into the cohort versus somebody who's doing selection in a cohort and a district will pick out who they want based on who does the best. And the last little one was kind of just a little nitpicky thing for me is sometimes we'll reference kind of a next year of like June of this date since we work off the school year. And I was tired of the old application system where you'd have to scour the entire system to look for the correct year and where to correct it. So with this flow, we took a what we had in a survey tool, which was very heavy with complex automation that didn't always work and took days to update with a new cohort. Now with this flow, we're able to update in a couple minutes, getting a cohort set up and ready to go. So let's jump into the demo. So I'm going to start with the staff view. On our cohort record, we're just have some basic information like what's the cohort name, the program start date, but where it really interacts with the flow is this admissions and enrollment summary section. So one of the things we were thinking about was our programs tend to be only open for registration for a specific amount of time. So we want to be able to stop people from being able to register. So we solved that with kind of an easy existing pick list of right now it's listed as open. If we change it to closed, then people will get an error message saying this cohort's been closed. So that way we don't have people accidentally applying for the wrong year or anything like that. This BIF required is, I just saw a question that is cohort a custom object, and yes, it is. The BIF required is kind of that this is the level of application we have. So in this case, I'm just going to walk through the shortest application, which we call our standard. Then over here, we have this give access question. So this is, Docebo is our learning management system. So it's saying after somebody fills out the registration form, should they get immediate access to our LMS system? In this case, I said yes. And then over here, we have the cohort code, so we can come up with any unique code that we want for participants to use. We also have this custom questions option, which I haven't used here, but where we can add additional custom questions either on the first or last page for the cohort. So let's dive into what it looks like from the participant side. As I said, we use Salesforce Communities. So I've just done a flow screen inside of Salesforce Communities. I'm going to click next. And here it's asking for my cohort code. And so for this automation hour cohort, the cohort code is AH2021. Now, because I made this field, it has to be unique, but it is case insensitive. So I can, people can put in whatever case they want. So we're gonna hit next, and then it will just take me to kind of the basic information. It'll ask me for name, email address, that kind of stuff. And if you, as you can see here, a lot of this is already filled out because as a user, I've already given the system my information. So if we go next, again, that's kind of the same thing here is because I've already, in this case, done part of the application, filled out superintendent, that position would already be pre-populated. The next one is going into the state or charter. And so in that case, we're going to, I have a list of all 50 states. So I'm going to click New York and then click next. And that pick list actually populates this pick list. So one of the pick list options for Flow is you can do a record choice pick list. So it's saying turn a certain group of records into pick list choices. And so we realized, why not do that with our account setup in Salesforce? We already have all of the districts and schools and that kind of thing in there and labeled as such. So rather than managing a completely separate list of schools and districts just for the registration form, let's utilize what's already in Salesforce. So I'm going to choose Department of Education, just going to say no to this. Then after that, it just takes me to basic demographic information. Next, it's one of kind of standard disclaimer, and I have some validation on it, so that way people can't proceed without checking off. So if you check off and then next, and then it will let me know that I can go back to the homepage and refresh to see my participant homepage. So I'm just gonna refresh. And we don't have an LMS integration with this sandbox, but I just put in this little text to show you how it would kind of look of, they could refresh the homepage and then the screen would have our LMS appear. And because we have an integration between our Salesforce communities and our LMS, it will pass information and they'll automatically be enrolled in the correct cohort. So they'll go straight from 5 minutes or so filling this out, refresh the page, they have the LMS open, have their content that they're able to access and walk through. So really trying to make this as seamless and easy a process as possible. So let's dive into the actual flow. As you can see, it's pretty sizable since it is since it has lots of different options and possibilities. So we're gonna zoom in. And so it starts off, as you kind of saw, with the new application. We're asking for the cohort code. Somehow we managed to, even though this is after people log in, the system thought there was a guest user at one point. So I made an extra decision in case the system thinks there is a guest user again, just asking people to log out and log back in. But by default, and like the vast majority of the time, it just does a get records. So this is using the cohort code that they entered and searching it against our cohort records in Salesforce. And so this is that's where I did create this field to enforce it to be unique. So that way we wouldn't run into the problem of duplicate cohort codes. And so from here, there's a couple different decisions on what could possibly happen. If it comes back null, that probably means they've put in the wrong cohort code, so they have an incorrect cohort code screen. The next check is if it's the cohort's closed, so it's again redirecting them to a specific error message. And then because we're using communities, the user and contact records are very tightly integrated, so we're able to just immediately pull that contact fields. And there's also a special decision record in case this isn't a community user for some reason. I was really trying to just list out all of the possible things that could go wrong and creating specific errors for them. So after that, between the contact record we're getting here and the cohort record we got before, that's enough information to be able to find if there's a application record. So from there, it gets into another decision of creating the application. And then if it already has the application, it does a get. And I just have this routed through the same place. So that way, because this is specifying, I decided for this case I wanted to manually assign the fields and variables, so I didn't want to have to separate that out into two different places, which is why they're kind of redirected through here. And then I've added another decision in here for making sure that people haven't already submitted, because we've definitely had that situation before where people will submit it and then they'll hit next or finish and then end up right at the same beginning screen, and so then think they need to submit it again and again and again. So that's why I added that check to make sure, nope, you've already submitted it. Here's where you're supposed to go. From there, it's just the basic disclaimer, and here's kind of the first decision for the custom questions. In this case, we thought the custom questions might be varied enough that we couldn't just create a default like here's a text box and pulling a question from the cohort record, but we do have this logic just based off of this pick list because we wanted to put as much power as possible into the hands of the users. So we're going down to default outcome. We have the contact information screen. And here we have a couple of different pick lists depending on the version. One that we saw before was this preferred phone pick list. So here we're using I have two choices. I have the preferred phone is just a kind of a pick list that's already exists on the account record, or sorry, on the contact record. So I'm just pulling that in from there. But this preferred phone choice is actually a formula fields. So if we go to the manager and go to the phone formula, it's looking if the preferred phone on the contact is blank, and if it is, it will show as required field, please choose one. But if it's not, then it will show as the preferred phone name. So this way we kind of get the best of both worlds because Salesforce is determined to default to the first option. I'm kind of using that to my advantage, so that way the users can either have the information already pre-populated for them, or they just see a simply this field is required. This is so. And then if I go to the choice I made for it, I put the formula in as a resource here, and then the choice value I put in the preferred phone itself. This way, if it comes out as null, because somebody clicked next without filling out that field, it will be able to hit that decision point and be able to go into my custom error screen. So the custom error screen is will just redirect if that, let me open that back up. We'll say looking, in this case, it's looking at the address state since we have a pick list for state, and it will say, and for some reason it was working better with empty string rather than null, but it's saying like if it wasn't filled out and if the registration form isn't standard, because our kind of standard registration form, our shortest version, doesn't need the address. So we don't want to accidentally push those people into the error message when they shouldn't be. And then we have a special specific error screen, and we use component visibility to show only the particular errors that people are relevant to them. I didn't want to just a generic required fields that you haven't filled out. I wanted to be really specific with this is why your problem, why you got pushed to this error screen. So I use component visibility to customize what errors will show up. So if both of them are null, both of them will show up, and if only one is, only one will. I use a ton of formulas all over this flow to really tighten it up and make it as small and as efficient as possible. Another example of that is actually back at the create. As everybody loves, specifying record types. In this case, in our case, we have two main categories of people, people who are just kind of our general applicants, which make up the majority of our programming, or our specific alumni programming, which has a specific alumni record type. So in this case, I just am looking of if the cohort program is alumni, then I'm going to put in the alumni record type. But if it's just anything else, it's going to use the anything else. And so then I use that in the create records as just populating in the fields, I populate that record type. So it's a super easy, I only need one create, even though I have multiple different possible record types. So now we're going into the next stage. This is, again, one of the parts of this is looking at if it's a standard or our shortest registration form. Because our shortest registration form does not use or does not ask for the address, but previous ones do, I was at first trying to combine them and see if they could be used in the same update records, but with having the state pick list fields, which is kind of a pain to work with, it just was not updating nicely by using the formula fields like I did with the record type. So I just decided to split it off, add a decision in here. And so then this one is kind of updates the records, and then again looks at the level of the registration form. Our core registration form is our longest, so that's why it's kind of leading down here. So our core registration form we use for our most intensive programs, and so one of the things we need as part of that is people to upload their resumes. I don't know if you all have had a chance to work with the Flow file uploader before, but it looks initially good in a very like nice new lightning way. And when you first upload something, it will show a progress bar and that it's been uploaded. But as soon as you close out of that kind of uploading screen and go back to the initial screen you start with, it looks exactly the same. So there's no way for a user to know, oh, my resume has been uploaded. So I actually included a specific display text. So I was trying all of these different tricks and different ways to be like, how do I check if this resume has been uploaded or not? What I ended up figuring out was the two things that always get updated when a resume is uploaded is the content docs ID and the file names. These two are kind of a unique collection variable type of thing, so you can't just say, is this null or not? Because you'll get the brackets and it'll be like, oh, it's never null, even if nothing got uploaded. So if you do the contact content docs ID does not equal the file names, then that will, because of course the file names would never be a Salesforce ID, that will immediately show up as soon as somebody is finished uploading their resume and closed out of that upload with upload pop out. So this way it's just kind of an added verification for those people who might be like, wait, I thought I did I not? And we also have, because we realize our core, our longest one, could be quite long, we have two, so we expect people to they're gonna probably come back. I have an added decision to say, like, if the resume has already been uploaded, just go ahead and skip the screen on to the next education and certification type of thing. So again, here you can see with all these, we have lots of pick lists. So I need for each pick list to have a specific decision to make sure it's been filled out, since while I don't think the if it's reading as null, it would be filled out, but Salesforce is in, well, something was selected, therefore it is filled out. So again, we have that same kind of thing where we have the initial formula choice as the first one, and then the general whole pick list from the object as the second choice. This does result in there being two of whatever, if there is a pre-selected option, there will be two options in that list, but I found that was kind of a worthwhile cost to pay for it being so simple, and pretty much if it's pre-populated, the people are already going to have selected that, so it should be correct. So I could see how some people would not be okay with that, but for us and for our use case, that was fine. Again, we also have then a decision element, a decision for each check, going down to this error screen, which I'm also using the custom visibility for. I also have used the custom visibility within the screens itself, so that way we could get the right information for the right people. So for example, this, do you have a graduate degree? Yes, no. If they do have a graduate degree, we want to collect that information in like what institution, what state, that kind of thing. But if they don't, then we don't need that. So I have the component visibility as like it either is yes or no, but they're currently enrolled. The text fields were also pretty easy to, you can just pop in this, the default value as pulling in from the application record itself. So that way, not just not just the pick list fields, but also the, not just the pick list fields get a default value, but also the text fields too. The only ones we don't have default values being able to be pre-populated are like checkbox or checkbox groups. So as you can see here, there's just a basic update records after every screen, because I wanted to make sure to save people's progress. And as you can see here, all of the red dotted lines are the fault lines. So that's what happens if there's a system problem. And so like one of those unhandled fault errors. So those all go up to just a basic error screen that's saying like there's been an error processing and to contact our support email. To try to stop this as much as possible, I was religious about putting validation rules for everything that a person could possibly put in. So in this case, for like, we're on the certifications page, their title of certificate is a text field. So I'm putting in validate input with an error message, and then the formula, which is calculating the number of characters. If you've never worked with validations in Flow, it reads opposite to how validation rules work in objects. So in this case, if it reads as true, then they may continue without a problem. But if it reads as false, they have to stop and fix whatever the error is. I knew this was going to be a super cautious, like there's probably no titles of certifications that are actually over 255 characters, but I just wanted to be completely sure that I'm building in every single possible guardrail and validation and check to make sure that the users get as few errors as possible. So just going through all of those, lots of screens for our longest form, and then into the current professional experience. I had to split this into two screens because of that state pick list. I knew I wanted to have pulling our using a record pick list to pull account information about districts and schools from Salesforce. But the real challenge I had was we work with districts all over the country. I can't just I have to be prepared for any state to be able to start at any point in time, but it's not realistic to make 50 different pick lists and have all of that component visibility. So I was trying to figure out like, how do I do this? So I ended up realizing that if you have they have to be on two different pages, but if you have a pick list, you can then use that in your in the filtering of the account record pick list choice. Let me actually pull up what that looks like now. So here we have the district record choice set. And so it's saying the billing state code should equal this district charter state. And this district charter state is the name of the screen component. So it's able to use that screen component in the filtering. So I get responsive filtering based off of what was put in on the previous screen without any work or any updating on our side. This works particularly well for us because we do have the pick list enabled for our states on the account records. So that again is going into the next screen, and because we have different variations depending on what the application looks like. For example, like, does the school receive Title I funding is only seen for certain applications. So that's where we use a ton of component visibility, so that way I'm able to keep it down to one screen, but everybody gets what they need to be able to proceed. And then here I'm going into just the update our optional information, and then the last screen question, custom questions. So again, this is kind of the same as the start, where that a cohort can enable custom questions, and then we'll just have to add specific questions and filtering in the update after that. But I realized it was too complex, since some cohorts might want pick lists, some might want text fields, some might want checkboxes. So while I tried to have as much as possible controlled through this one cohort record, that was just kind of a little bit too far. So after the final confirmation screen, it goes into the updating records and updating contact based on the optional demographic information, and then to the thank you screen. And again, gotta love it, more component visibility. Based off of this, the checkbox on whether or not they get immediate access to the LMS is when then depends on whether they see instructions to go to their My Applications tab. If they don't get immediate access, and so they probably have selection activities they need to do, or if they do get immediate access, they're directed back to the home page, and so then they refresh and are able to see the LMS. Okay, I'm going to look at the questions now. There was, okay, are you creating their account in the LMS at this point? We actually have an integration between our LMS and the Salesforce communities. So as soon as they see that LMS iframed in Salesforce communities, an account is automatically created for them. What kind of documentation did you create? What kind of documentation did you create for automation and a flow like this? We already had an existing application setup very similar to this, but in a survey tool. So it was kind of writing out what does all of that do, what are the different options, and that kind of thing. What do you do to find matches with a contact record and applicant? What about possible dupes? This is one benefit of using in Salesforce communities is their user record is already tied to their contact record. So I'm not so worried. So it's just kind of a direct pull. Let me open that up. Where I'm just saying the ID is the running user contact ID, which is a formula. Because Flow always knows who the running user is, and then the Salesforce has a specific contact lookup field that's only for community users. So we just want to find the contact that's connected to this current user. Let me, okay. You mentioned creating record choice sets from a subset of records. Can you get into more detail about that? Sure. Nope, that's not what this is called. So if I go to the district record choice set, what you can do as part of a standard record choice set is you can filter the account records. And so in this case, you can, I'm doing both some filtering based on what was entered in a screen before it, as well as some hard-coded entry, because I know from the pick list we have on the account that public school district is is how we would tag all of our districts of this choice. And then you can configure from there with the choice name and choice value in terms of how it should, how do you want Salesforce to then treat it kind of as a pick list value. Let me pop out the questions again. On the screen with multiple conditional fields to previous responses cause subsequent ones to dynamically appear and disappear. We don't have any dynamically disappearing, but we definitely do have some that are dynamically appearing. For example, if I go, actually this one doesn't have any. If I go to the current professional experience, if we do say, if somebody answers yes to that they currently teach STEM, we then have a checkbox groups that appear and that they can then select from there. So I use that to just make, if we want to dive deeper in to their answer. Sorry, I'm trying to find the next question. How did you get license and provision your community users, and is it access to the flow you just demonstrated is just a small portion of the overall community content they can access? I think we have, I'm not in detail on what our community user licenses are, but I think it's per login is kind of how we get charged. And I think most community users have or I think community users in general do have access to Flow. And for the overall access, yes. It it kind of depends on who they are. So for somebody who's this is kind of what it looks like or would look like for just a brand new applicant, is just having that option to new applications. But when they're a participant, then the LMS would appear and they would have access to that. And when they're an alumni, we have an additional suite of different benefits and things we give specifically for our alumni and our alumni programming. How long did this take? Thank you for calling it amazing and challenging. How long did this take? I would say a couple months. I think it was a month or so that it took me to build out the initial part of it, which was kind of the simpler version of the flow, and then it's kind of been built on with different levels of our application system. And then as we've changed and added more levels of our application system, so I'd say a couple of months or about 2 months for the bulk of it, and then it's been slowly adding on, and there's still a lot of new features that I want to add in. Like this will only pull if you have an existing application for this cohort, but I really love if they filled out an application last year for it to pull that information in too, because I really want to minimize the amount of repetitive information. That was kind of the same as the second question, or this other one, which is how long did this project take you from requirements gathering to completed version of this Screenflow? I would say a couple months. I kind of ended up happening that we had talked about it and talked about it. And then finally decided, I was like, you know what, we got to make the jump. We're about to start application season. I think I can do this in this month or so. So that was kind of a real push in terms of I want to do this, and because we already had the old application system, which wasn't very good, we kind of knew already what fields and what things were collected, so there wasn't as much of that I needed on the requirements gathering side. It was more just on the building and debugging, which actually gets into the next question. This looks like a really complex flow. Do you find it easy to debug in case of issues? There was actually a lot of debugging in the beginning where it was pretty much every single thing I had to be like, how can I possibly break this? And it was both just me running through it as normal and being like, okay, what happens if I still leave it on that required not answered? Will I get through? And so it was kind of trying to, especially since this is something all of our participants will have to go through pretty much, I wanted to kind of find every possible route of how somebody could cause this flow to fail. That's why pretty much every single text field or anything like that has a validation on it. For those incoming applications, are you doing a review of those applications in Salesforce with another flow? No, any of the, all of this information gets populated into a application record, which I can actually show you. So if you go to the Participants and Applicants tab, and then go to Applications, this is just kind of a basic record that we've then had listed out, and like what day did they finish, and any specifics. Again, there's a lot more fields here depending on whether it's depending on what type of flow this, what type of application this is. So if a user wanted to review the application, they would just go to the application record itself, since that's a custom object for us.
Great. So again, reminder to folks, if you have any additional questions on her presentation, you can post it out here. Also, if you have a general process automation question, you can also ask that as well. So while we wait and see if there are any more questions, I always like hearing about people's stories about how they actually got to learn flow. So can you share yours?
Sure. Uh, I am pretty much self-taught with all of my automation. And so what happened was I was building 101 processes at my last job, and I realized like there was a point where it's like I know what I need to do in automation, and I can't, which was in this case I can't even remember why I was doing it, but it was deleting a record, and I'm like I can't do this with Process Builder, but I know you can do it with Flow. And so my first flow was a flow that was called from a process, and all it did was deleted the specified record that Process Builder gave it. I had tried my hands at Flow before and didn't understand anything about variables or hadn't done any coding like things, and so I had no idea what I was doing. It totally failed, and I just was like, nope, I can do everything I need with Process Builder. And then finally, I came a day when I couldn't do something with Process Builder, and said, oh, so then learned how to do. It was literally just a like start element and then the delete element. And I got that to work, and it was such a cool feeling of being like, oh my gosh, you can actually use this thing. And that was before they gave it the nice upgrade to make it all lightning-y and pretty.
Oh, I was about to ask you, I'm like, which interface was that?
Yeah, it was the old interface where I had to be like, what are S-object variables?
Yes.
Yeah, so I made that jump and then just started building more and more, as our use cases increased, and was like, okay, and my kind of confidence grew from there of being like, okay, I can take this first step. I started to really understand how variables worked, and so then how I could really manipulate them and pull information from various parts of Salesforce. And yeah, now I love them.
What would you say is your favorite feature of Flow?
Oh, there's so many to choose from. I'm actually going to go with, it's kind of a strange one, but I would say you making formulas in Flow. I use a huge amount of formulas in Flow of being able to, like, if I want to create a specific name for a record that I'm pulling from various places, or if I want to shortcut and just kind of have an if formula within my create, so that way I don't have to have two different create records for things. I just love the amount of kind of, I feel like it's almost sneaky different ways that you can really shrink down your flows by just using formulas.
And if you had the ear of the PM and could get any feature you wanted in Flow, what would that be?
Oh, I mean, right now, in my very specific use case, I just really want a check for is new. Um, but that's also because that's the very specific issue I'm dealing with at this very moment in work, is I'm like, I just need to know if this in and after update flow, if this is an is new record.
Oh, have you tried using $record.id is null true? Because that's how you could say whether it's new or not. Because a new record wouldn't have an ID.
Does that work? Because I know that works for the before update, but does that work for after update too? I thought that was the like catch, that it didn't work for after updates.
Can you use like prior record ID? Because that one
Maybe
has.
prior record, or maybe something with the prior
There's a
record.
yeah, there's a way to trick it.
Okay, okay. Um, yeah. That's just the specific use case I'm getting into, because now it's kind of funny because I've especially with the now before update and after update flows, I've pretty much now exclusively do my automation building in Flow. I've almost completely abandoned for Process Builder, my old
hmm
love.
Same here too. All right, we have one question that came in from Dylan. Could you show us your use of formulas to not have to create another create element or get element?
Yeah, let me go back here. Um, So for our application system, we have two different record types. One is for kind of just a standard someone coming in, applying, and one is specifically for if somebody's trying to get into one of our alumni programs, then they need to be an alumni, and so have different record type. So let me go to the formula. And so I have this record type formula that's pulling from the cohort variable and saying if the cohort program variable, which is a pick list, is alumni, then to populate this record ID formula with the alumni record type ID. And if it's a everything else, do the standard one. And then in the create records, once it loads, I have various things populating it, but one of them is this record type formula. So that way everything's combined right into this one create records, rather than having to have one create records for if it's alumni program and a different create records for if it's a standard program, which would involve a decision and then two different creates, which would then have to lead back into this Git, but instead I just have a formula fields.
All right, last call for any more questions. What would you recommend someone new to Flow? How would they go about learning Flow?
This is a little bit of self-promotion, but I wrote a article on Medium, or that's on my Medium blog. I'll pull that up, pull up my Medium if anybody wants to look at it. Called Flow Fundamental Variables. And basically what that does is I realized my biggest challenge as a non-coder was I could not understand what variables were or what it was talking about when it said variables. So I wrote this whole blog post being like, these are the different kinds of variables. This is how to think about variables, just as a really I feel like that's kind of the biggest gap of if you don't understand variables, you're not going to be able to make the jump from process builder to flow. But if you have that kind of basic understanding, kind of that almost theoretical understanding of how variables work and what they are, then it's actually a pretty easy, because it's just kind of that same decisions creating. It is adding some more updates or deletes, but it's once you have that basic, that really helps. And of course, there's Trailhead and a bunch of different tutorials, but I found that was kind of what I was missing, was I didn't have that conceptual knowledge of what variables were. So I could read all these tutorials on how to do this thing, but not understanding necessarily the why.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one last thing, I do have a final slide. I also wrote a blog post about our application flow system for the Salesforce admins blog. So if you want to get a deeper look into like how some of the formulas work, then you can go to this link or like Salesforce admins blog, Deanne Walters, or search something like that. And you can read all about that if you're kind of more in a, if that's an easier way to digest it than over video.
Great, and we'll post the deck after the fact too. I think a couple more questions came in from Dylan. When using process, sorry. When using Process Builder, I really pushed the one process per object, but seems to be a bit trickier with Flow. Suggestions, thoughts?
I think that's kind of not necessarily fully correct with Flow. It's kind of, Flow has lots of different versions of it. You have the before update, you have the after update, you have the Screenflow. So I feel like it's almost one type of flow. So any before updates, rather than having 3 before updates flows on your account object, have 1 before update flow. Kind of probably if you can do a similar thing with the after update, just because Flow has more flexibility in terms of how you can do decision type of things. But I mean, with Screenflows, that's out the window. Like there's no reason why you would have only one Screenflow. So I think that's kind of, you have to figure out what's a comparable thing in terms of process builders more similar, and some of the rules of that might be more similar to the before update or the after update, but Screenflows are almost more like creating a lightning record page, which you can have as many as as many as you want of.
I'll have to add that the Salesforce position on that question, Dylan, and this relates to record triggered flows because that's what is equivalent to a process builder. But their thought is they're not going to say one flow per object, so one before save per object per your opportunity object, or just one after save for your opportunity object. It really depends, and it depends on how big your organization is. Some companies are fairly large, and so then they would recommend, well, maybe you section it off of the line of business that flow pertains to for like that object. So your opportunity object you might have for this specific line of business. So they're controlling that flow specifically for them versus this other line of business. Or and that's if you want to control the order of execution of the things within that given object. Or you could just do separate record triggered flows for the different use cases that you have. So they've really leaned out, backed off of that one process per object, same concept for one flow per object. Can Deanne place the BL slide 10 URL into the chat? Oh, someone else did it. Okay, great.
Yeah,
the recording
thank you,
will be, yeah, the recording will be available on automationhour.com, as well as our Trailblazer Community Salesforce Automation Hour sometime after the session. And I think that's it for questions. And we're pretty much at time. So thank you, Deanne, for coming on and presenting. Definitely a lot of great tips from your learnings on creating that awesome Screenflow, and a lot of food for thought for people as they build out their Screenflows and, you know, really tighten that up in terms of error handling and making it really efficient for your users. So I do want to have an open invitation for you to come back again and present in the future for us. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be on.
Yes. All right. And with that, we're going to close out the session. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you at the next automation hour. Thanks.